I didn't expect that you had anything more. Director Benarod, I'll leave it up to you to let me know when we're ready. Okay, good. We're now back in open session. For those listening in or for the record, we had a motion to close the session of the HRA to discuss, as permitted under Minnesota law, the potential sale of real property at the old public works site at 5146 Eden Avenue. We've completed that discussion. We've moved back into open session. And now we're going to entertain a motion to authorize staff to schedule a public hearing to consider the sale of real estate at 5146 Eden Avenue for redevelopment purposes. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Commissioner Staunton moves. Commissioner Anderson seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion as stated, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. And the motion is approved, and staff will now work on scheduling a public hearing to consider the sale of real estate at 5146 Eden Avenue for redevelopment purposes. And what's the potential date for that public hearing again, Manager Neuendorf?
We're looking at May 19th.
Okay.
We'll check the schedule and get notices out
Next week.
All right, very good. Thank you. And then we've got one other matter in front of us this morning. We're going to consider what I think Stephanie Hawkinson, our Affordable Housing Development Manager, calls gap financing, and I'm eager to hear. After reading the memorandum, I want to try to understand better what the gap financing concept is all about in a little bit more detail. So welcome Stephanie Hawkinson, our Affordable Housing Development Manager, who is going to give a presentation with regard to some challenges we've got around what we call the FRED 2, or at least Mr. Gunsbury is calling it the FRED 2. And I don't know, Fred Richards is sitting down in Florida, and he's got the Fred 1 and he's got the Fred 2. Man, that guy's got some, you know, first thing you're going to do is see some kind of licensing agreement from him. Tony's going to have to deal with that. So there's active construction going on at the Fred, and it's really pretty impressive out there how quickly they're moving. And there's a second piece of property, as we call it, the Fred 2 at 4620 West 77th Street, that's got some challenges around it. And our staff and the developer and the attorney are working on some creative ways to solve the problem that we've got. And also Nick Anhut, our senior municipal advisor from Ellers, is going to be available for question. And Nick, thanks for being here this morning. So go ahead. Thank you. Manager Hawkinson.
Well, you've done my introduction, so thank you very much for that. You know, it's not typical that we would come to you at this stage in the development. I don't have a firm gap request. This has not yet been fully underwritten. We do know, and what we mean by gap is that the construction costs, the total development costs, less what can be procured through debt financing, less what an investor can contribute or investors can contribute, leaves a gap. So investment to the property, debt financing to the property is not sufficient enough to cover the whole total development costs, and therefore there's this gap. And they are turning to the city to see if there is a possibility that we could fulfill the gap. The exact number of that right now, I don't know. So what I would be coming back to you for a formal request and with a term sheet and a redevelopment agreement in future meetings. But we need to know with a development such as this, if there's any appetite and get a sense from you what the questions are if gap financing would be approved for this development. They're at a stage right now, it's a go, no go to borrow from NASA, I guess, on a purchase agreement. And if there is, if they sense from you all, and if the questions lead them to the fact that for this type of development, there isn't any interest for public participation, then they know how to proceed with the next steps on the purchase agreement. Why we're interested and why we bring this forward is the project is not a luxury building in its entirety. There will be 10% of the units will be affordable per our affordable housing policy, but the remaining 90% of the units are affordable for households with incomes between 70 and 100% of area median income. And these are modest market rate apartments, which is something that is not currently being built in the city. So there's that aspect of it that makes it a little unique. It's the first project really after the April 1st start of our sustainability policy. And there are financial implications of that policy. And so this is the first one. I know the U.S. Bank site is incorporating that policy, but this one's first out of the gate. And so making that aware of those financial implications. There are some soil conditions in this area. It's a floodplain. And so there are some construction challenges, and they've realized that with the FRED. And importantly for this body, the site plan, you saw the sketch plan at the City Council, has access to the Fred Richards Park off of 77th. And that is part of their overall total development cost and the development vision for this site. So those are some of the variables that have caused me to bring it before you at this juncture in our negotiating and our underwriting of this project. So as I say, the developer came forward with about a $9.5 million gap. That is the shortfall that they have in order of their total development cost. I don't know the terms of what this loan from us could look like. We would be working on that over the next couple months. We have, however, identified what could be a source for this gap, and that the majority of which could come from Pentagon Park pooled TIF funds. This is within the Pentagon Park TIF area. And the map, you can see the Pentagon Park TIF district is all the parcels that are outlined in yellow, and this is within that district. And we would not pre-fund this development. I know that has been concerned with other projects, and whatever funding that would get approved would be available at financial closing. So it's about an $85 million project. And the developer estimates that about 14.5 would come from equity, 61.5 from debt, and then that is what leaves what they're looking for from the city. Again, we need to do a more thorough financial underwriting, but what this points out is that what they're seeking from us is 11% of the total development cost at this time. So a source that could fill this. Oh, and to talk about the project just a little bit more to remind you, it is a 276 unit multifamily development. And it does, as I indicated, the cost drivers are the poor soils, the inclusion of the affordable housing, the adherence to sustainability policy, and the access to Fred Richards. It does not qualify for redevelopment TIF. It is not a blighted building that's there currently. It also does not qualify for housing TIF, as 10% of the units will be affordable at 50% of area median income, and housing TIF would require 20% of the units. When we looked at the numbers for having it qualify for a housing TIF district, the gap increased to about 14 million. And so we looked at different opportunities, and this one seemed like the most reasonable. Yeah.
The equity source, 14.5 million, 70%. Is that typical?
In the marketplace for the a modest market rate apartment project?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Anhut on this one.
I mean, that's one way you solve the gap problem, isn't it? I mean, more equity.
Well, I think, Mr. Chair, members of the governing body here, I think that is the constraint that the developer is conveying to us, is that the level of equity necessary to get over the gap, there would be virtually no return anticipated on that equity, so it cannot be raised privately. 17% is lower than we would typically see for a project, but I think it's the constraints that Ms. Hawkinson already mentioned, that they're not able to see a light at the end of the tunnel as far as a return on investing those dollars.
So outside investors would look at a potential ROI and over 17 million, they don't see it.
Correct.
At least that's what the developer's realizing and going out to the market. Okay, all right, that's helpful. Thank you.
With the other developments that we have seen, market rate, that do include affordable units, we have not seen this type of request for gap financing, but a lot of those units are very high-end luxury. So the delta between the market rate rents and the affordable rents is quite large. And so they can absorb the loss of rental revenue on the affordable units in these luxury buildings. This one is not a luxury building, so the delta between the market rate units rents and the affordable rents they're close.
Okay, that's helpful. What about what this would look like? You've characterized it as a loan, not a grant, not TIF. What does this loan look like potentially?
Potentially, Chair and Commissioners, it could be a deferred loan. It could be a cash flow loan. It could be one idea, and this has not been vetted yet with the developer, so I don't know the implication on their budget, but something to explore. Thank you for hearing this for the first time, is the Edina Housing Foundation said, well, what if we get the land and we lease it to them? So maybe this is like what we did at 4040 West 70th, and it is a forgivable loan to the Edina Housing Foundation, and they supply the land at as a ground lease to the project. Again, I don't know what the implication is. This is the first time they're hearing it. But I think that's where we're going to spend the next few months exploring different creative options of how this could look. Since the rents are all 100% within this workforce housing level, I would recommend that there would be some restrictions on the growth of the market rate rents. One way to do that would be the ground lease model. Another would be a declaration on the whole property. Because what we wouldn't want to happen is that we underwrite it at all the units being at 100% of AMI or below, and then in 3 years, they're at 200% AMI, and we have all this money in the deal. And it's no longer this 100% workforce housing. So I think that's what we want to, if there's a desire to move forward with looking at different creative ways of being able to justify this amount of gap and how we can secure the city's interest in it, that's what the type of information I want to get from you today. If you look at the dollars and for a project that is meeting our sustainability policy, meeting our affordable housing policy, and not going far beyond either, we're not interested. I need to hear that. Or if the access to Fred Richards and the fact that this is something that's entering the marketplace that's not currently there, really, then we go forward.
I'm going to go to Commissioner Pierce because he's got some schedule pressure, so I want to go to him first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if anybody was ever in doubt if we had the right person focused on helping us solve our affordable housing challenges, there should be no more doubt. I can't imagine why we would say no. We don't want you to be creative. We don't want you to look at other options. I can't imagine at this stage why we would say no. And I like that you've thrown out some potential creative solutions already. And I am happy to continue to work with you to help come up with others. So I think it makes sense at this juncture for you to bring back some additional creative ideas that we can evaluate.
Chair, Commissioners, with all due respect, I have 5 more slides.
I apologize.
I mean, if we can jump to the punchline if you would like, but I mean, I can give you more information if you'd like to. So, as I said, I just wanted, for your sake and for the audience's sake, the Pentagon Park TIF district was created in 2014. So some on the dais were not here when that was created. So I did want to let you know about that source of funding. Like I said, all the parcels are in the district, including this one. It was a 26-year term. And the reason this TIF district was created was because most of the buildings, over 50%, were considered lighted at the time. Due to the legislative rulings, restrictions, thank you, 25% of the funds can be pooled for other redevelopment activities. And so that's where we came up with about $7 million would be available, and that's a somewhat of a conservative number that'd be available in that pooling from this district itself. And that does include tax increment that is being captured from the FRED 1 and the FRED 2. So the projects, the FREDs, are contributing to this increment that would be available to be putting back into the development of FRED 2. So I'll flip through these because I feel like I cut you off, Commissioner Pierce. Some of the rationale that we even approved the district to begin with. And it was for the things that we're seeing on the site, and this was done in, again, 2014, that there were need for soil corrections or stormwater features, public streets and sidewalks, shared structure parking, demolition. So these were some of the reasons that that TIF district was created. All that pertains to this site in particular, except the shared parking. That parking is an issue on this site because of the soil issues and how it needs to be constructed. So then here's what you saw with the sketch plan. And one of the reasons why I think there was so much enthusiastic support at the time of sketch plan was the access to the Fred Richards Park. And again, the TDC and therefore the gap financing here would be used to support these access points. Which at the time at City Council seemed like they were very important, be it the Wooner, be it the pedestrian sidewalks, the boulevard, all those access points would be covered by this development, and therefore whatever future gap financing would be put into this project. Unknowns. As I indicated earlier, I don't know what the loan terms are at this point. I'm not seeking approval for those. I will be coming back. I don't know, we have to look at all the different sources that could be. I don't know what the internal rate of return is for the investors. We'd want to make sure that it is with industry standards and what we've accepted in the past, and that we're not over inflating our gap in order to give some sort of unreasonably high rate of return for the investors. We'd want to make sure that it's all within the industry standards, that it's what's sufficient to make the project move forward but doesn't overly enrich anyone on the public dollar. We'd have to look at the cap rates. We'd have to look, during the next few months, we'd be looking at all these variables to make sure to size the gap appropriately. They're seeking now at this juncture $9.5 million with these unknown supply chain issues and costs of lumber and all these things we're seeing repeatedly that is really escalating construction costs. But there's still too many unknowns to be able to say this is the dollar amount for sure, and we know that all these other variables are lined up to make this a reasonable request. But 9.5, even out of the gate, without looking at this, gave us pause to want to get some sort of feeling from you. But there is public benefit to this.
On the flip side, though, I mean, when I look at the potential costs you've listed in your report, some of these might be dealt with through Met Council grants, soil abatement problems could be dealt with in other ways. Could be deed grants involved here that help reduce that gap. Is that true on the flip side as well?
Chair Commissioners, for sure. I mean, and that would be something that we'd want to talk to them about. The 9.5 would be the big picture right now without looking at these items, but we would definitely want to work towards encouraging for ERF funds, for TBRA funds, for LCDA, for all those different, with this go, no-go timeline that they have with the seller, those funds would not be sufficient to close the entire gap.
So here's, before Commissioner Pierce has to leave, here's the question that comes to mind for me. Do we think as a community it's worthwhile making a secured loan in this project to get what we want for access to the Fred Richards and for achieving some level of housing affordability? That's the question I got in my mind.
Correct.
And it seems to me that I would concur with Member Pierce personally. I just wanted him to hear that before he leaves. So, all right. Mr. Sutton.
Yeah, I think you frame it really well, Mr. Chair. The two policy things are the access and then this, what I call small a affordability. It's this range of affordability that we talked about in the Housing Task Force report. It's not just the kind of technical 50 or 60% of AMI, but it's 70, 80, 90, 100%. And I think that's something that there's good reasons for us to invest in. The question is how much, of course, and where the money comes from and how it works, but I'm supportive.
Member Anderson, Commissioner Anderson.
Thank you. So I guess I would just reflect similar sentiments to what you've heard from colleagues here. I guess all the reasons that we know that this is a good project, and I'm in favor of this project and have been from the get-go because of its range of affordability, and I know that these guys do a great job, and so that's established. In terms of a loan, I'm in favor of a good business transaction between the city and the developer. I would not be in favor of a forgivable loan of some kind. We are facing uncertain economic times, and it seems to me that we want to have some surety as just a matter of stewardship. We want to have some surety that these funds don't simply go in one direction, can be used to accomplish goals, and can be very creative about repayment terms. All of that is fine, but I just want to be certain that we're good stewards.
Commissioner Jackson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So a couple of things. One is when we looked at TIF financing recently, we talked about a 10% cap on public funds. And so there's some consistency in doing that. And I know this is a very different type of financing that we're looking about, but boy, the closer we can get to that 10%, the more comfortable I am with it. I mean, overall, I think this is a really exciting project, and I'd like to see it happen. The other question is actually, this is for Solheim. With the sustainability policy, I'm a little concerned now that every project coming forward is going to need public funds to do that. When we created our housing policy in 2015, we've had a lot of iterations of it. And I hope that, I assume you're working with Grace Hancock on this, but boy, if we could come up with a more flexible, something where we don't consistently have to have public financing to meet our sustainability goals, I would really like that. And I don't know why LEED over B3 is preferable, but if there is a Edina way to do this where we don't have to depend on this really expensive certification, I would love to find that, but it may not be possible. But anyways, I hope that that's part of your conversation with Grace, and that we can get this policy to where it's something that's usable, and we don't consistently have to put public funds towards it. Is that useful? Well, I guess I just want you to consider that, and I do actually, just the B3 versus, I know it's really early in the game, but versus LEED.
Mr. Gunsbury, why don't you come forward so we can get you on the microphone here, making sure it's part of the record.
Good morning, Commissioners, Mayor, Stephanie, Bill.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
So it costs a lot to do third-party certification. LEED is probably the most expensive. So by using LEED as your standard, you're by definition, choosing to make all the projects more expensive, right? I'm not completely familiar with B3. I do think a simple checklist to your purposes, Councilmember Jackson, or Commissioner, are you guys commissioners? Yeah, sorry. Commissioner Jackson, I think that would be potentially appropriate. You have a small city, you have a very limited number of projects, you have very committed development people on your team. So just as a developer, I see this as a really big financial hurdle that we didn't have on Fred Phase 1. And you can see it's $850,000 that that's money we can't spend on really basic stuff, like a road into the Fred. So, and that's adding significantly, that's probably the 1% extra right there that you're concerned about within our project, right? So, I don't know, you could have a very simple checklist. For me, that would be the Xcel Energy commissioning. That's a really important part of what we do, and it's probably the most valuable thing that we do. And you could have sustainability checklists that you have, which you guys already have in place, where it's either met or not met, and you can have somebody on your team verify that stuff. I do think it's problematic that we need to spend $850,000 on a potentially really awesome project that's not going to change anything about what we build in the project. So that's, to get to your point, it's probably a waste of our public resources to require this, at least in this situation, partly because we're already ahead of lead on so much of what we do, and we're more interested than, officialdom is, right? And because we have a personal interest. So I don't know how another developer would respond to that without some kind of fairly straightforward checklist. But Xcel is the place to start, I think.
Yeah. So are you working with Grace Hancock on this? Or
Jason has been.
Okay,
yes.
good.
Yeah.
So, I will loop back with her and maybe with Mr. Teague. I don't know exactly how that works into it, but it seems like that's a huge expense. And I've talked to other developers. And so we want the goal, right, of the sustainable buildings. But boy, I think we need to continue to work on this policy, and your feedback would be really useful on that.
Yeah, we did LEED once. We've done one LEED project in Minneapolis, and it came out gold. And again, we didn't change anything about what we would have built anyway, but it was very expensive. There was a big, long tail on it. And for us, it just verified that we're already at those standards, right? But, it seems like potentially a waste of money. That's all.
B3 is the standard used for public buildings in Minnesota.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, I don't know if that'd be more cost efficient or not, but just so you're aware of that.
There are other standards too that are less intensive than LEED that you could, that might cost $400,000 instead of $800,000, for example. That Grace could probably look at and give you a summary for as a group.
Okay.
If you're looking for third party, which I do think third party is the right way, because then you remove yourselves from the process.
Exactly.
Right?
Okay, wonderful. That's really useful feedback.
Right.
Thank you so much.
You bet. And actually,
Executive
a couple
Director
more.
Neal, you had your hand up.
I did. Thank you, Your Honor. I think for many of us on staff, the Park Road connection is one that's a very important benefit to this, particularly as we are going to be asking residents to approve a pretty substantial investment in that park. The current access to the park is really not commensurate with what we're planning to do there. So having some kind of road connection that's a factor in this redevelopment is very important, and very important to have that issue resolved before we ask folks to vote on this issue.
All right, good. Any other questions for Mr. Gunsbury?
I had a couple. May I comment? Is that okay?
Go ahead.
Just a couple of things. One, I think we need to keep in mind that Hillcrest, or the Hillcrest ownership group, is contributing the park access for free. We don't have that in the budget, and that's a value added to this that's not in any of Stephanie's numbers. To gain an access like that across public lands, we know in the real estate business that's millions of dollars of negotiation and time and potentially years, right? So it really is this very limited window, and it's a value that's not being calculated in your economic models right now. So to your point, it's definitely something you have to think about. There's another $1 million right there, right? For free. The money for free is for free on that one. And then if that access weren't free, our costs would of course be higher. A couple other things, just to the grant question that you had brought up, Mayor Hovland. I don't think we'd qualify for any of those grants that you were
Okay.
bringing up. We've been through those grant processes many times. I don't see anything on our site that qualifies
Yeah,
us
thanks
for
for that
those
candor.
grants. So just a quick, probably no, you know. And then, let's see. One concern we have about the road access is that it could actually be much more expensive than what we've shown in the numbers. We don't know. We don't have a bid. So we've put in here $1.5 million. It could easily be $2.5 million. For us to commit to something like this at such an early stage is really problematic on the risk side. So when you're looking at the risk versus reward equations for our investors, we're putting those numbers out to Stephanie because we actually have to be very cautious about what we're doing. You know, typically we'll fund a project at 25% equity, 75% loan. That's really standard for what we do. I think that's relatively standard across the business. It's generally a range of 20 to 30% equity, but we're usually at 25. The reason we have to be so cautious is because it's really early days on this, and we just don't know even how to get that access road in there and still preserve all the parking we have to for the existing users on the private land. And I also want to say, the pictures that you guys have seen from your consultants may not work. We might have no sidewalks within that road access. It may just be a road access. We may have to rely on the Woonurf area as the pedestrian access that we would create. So I'm just saying, on all edges of this, all these things are still quite questionable, right? I don't want to paint a picture that we can't deliver. I want to be really rational about this. I know we can get a road access in there. I don't know that we can get the other ones. I know we can do something in the range of $1.5 million, but it may be more. We would be bearing all the risks of that, not the city of Edina. So keep that in mind when you're negotiating on behalf of the taxpayers. And then a couple other things, sorry. The world has radically changed in the past 6 months for real estate financing, radically. Interest rates are double what they were 2 months ago. That alone just changes everything, you guys, just radically changes it. We've seen construction costs go up not 8%, but 23% for different categories of construction. There are some contractors you can't even get to deliver things because of supply chain issues. So we're living in a completely changed world. I haven't brought up, what's happening in the Eurasian landmass right now, right? There's a lot of stuff going on. So these are all uncertainties that, again, we go back to these models that we've used maybe traditionally or have worked really well for the past dozen years. They are not working right now. We're seeing lots of land deals fall out of pocket because the numbers just aren't working and people aren't willing to take the risk. Investors aren't willing to take the risk when these numbers don't work. So please keep that in mind for not just my project, but any project you're reviewing in the coming months. We're all under, lots of heavy guns against new development. Housing is going to radically increase in cost, radically. We have not seen anything yet. In the next few years, that's my personal prediction, if I'm your economist for the day. But I think you're going to see those changes because we're the canary in the coal mine right now. We're actually doing pricing building today, right? And we have 3 building sites in the city right now, or in the metro. We're seeing radical changes. We're pricing 5 other projects, and several of them won't pencil, including Londonderry, which we presented to you guys a few months ago. We're pretty sure that's just never going to work, you guys. We'll come back to you again, but we're pretty sure it's just not going to work. For other issues that Chad can probably talk about at some other point. But and then let's see, a couple other things. Counter offer to Stephanie since we're live.
We can negotiate some of that stuff out.
Oh, I just wanted to present if we could repay a housing trust loan and create some kind of mechanism where the investors get rewarded. Let's say Edina gives us a loan from the housing trust, and we have the option to potentially repay it back into the loan and then potentially take away requirements for affordability, things like that. That's when our investors are going to say, oh, okay, then we can take advantage of an upside to offset the potential risk that we're taking on. Those are the kinds of things that we'd want to negotiate back and forth about. So I was happy to hear that Commissioner Pierce was open to the idea. But it's definitely this dance that we have with investors, with capital, capital has to be rewarded, you guys. Otherwise, it won't invest. You guys know that very well. I'm not preaching I'm not teaching you anything new there. But I think that's the summary of where I'm at right now. And okay. Stephanie, I just got to say, she's been super creative about this. It's honestly kind of annoying because she's creative and forces us to think differently about things and reframe and come up with other ways to manage our economic model. But annoying is good, right? Because we know that, that's how you make pearls, right? You got to have a little annoying sand in there to get the pearl. And so anyway, I just want to say, Stephanie, you've done a great job. It's annoying and it's awesome. So you're lucky to have her. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, thanks, I think. I thought if you kept talking, you might snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. I think all of those comments of yours are things that we recognize, these uncertainties that we face. That was one of the questions I had for Bill earlier, was are the appraisers saying they're seeing anything in terms of land prices that are reflective of what's happening with construction costs? Are they driving those costs down or prices down? And Tony may have a sense of that too. But nonetheless, I think, like you, I think you can hear this council, this HRA is undeterred. We're willing to go to the next step. So we're going to entertain a motion right now, as requested by Manager Hawkinson, to at least grant preliminary approval to provide potential gap funding for the development of the Fred 2. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
We got a motion by Commissioner Jackson.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Anderson. With respect to the motion as stated, any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion as stated say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. The only other thing I would say with, back to the Fred 2 thing, the guy sitting to my right has been working on city stuff for almost 30 years. I think you maybe ought to think about calling it to Kevin. I'm just kidding. All right. Just a tip of the hat.
Don't you dare.
That might fall into the thanks, I think, category too. All right. Folks, we got anything else that we want? Any HRA Commissioner comments? Commissioner Jackson, you want to comment on our shovel exercise a week or so ago at Pentagon Park?
Yes, so we went down to the groundbreaking. It was on Thursday, I believe. And where the project's underway is some nice discussion about the use of the, now I didn't prepare anything, but the pods where they're created down in Owatonna and then moved up here, and it's
Yeah, the modules.
modular. Thank you. The modular development is really exciting. The environmental aspect of it, the affordability aspect of it was fun. And former housing commissioner, is it Dahlheimer is her name? Or Dahlheim?
Mary,
Tingerthal. Thank you. Yeah.
Tingerthal, yep.
Yeah, I'm still learning all the Scandinavian names. But former housing commissioner Mary Tingerthal was there and had some comments on behalf of Representative Elkins, but also on her own, about what a creative and interesting use of affordable housing this was. So that was fun.
Right, very complimentary of Edina
Yeah.
and its willingness to get out front on some of this factory-built material. So, Manager Neal, Director Neal, anything?
Yes, Your Honor. I messaged the council HRA last night that we have a conflict the first week of June with your meeting schedule. We will not have a quorum for the council meeting on June 7th, nor for the HRA meeting scheduled for Thursday, June 9th. We previously sought your availability for a June 2nd HRA meeting, and we've had everybody could agree to that. We need to also look at that June 7th council meeting and whether we reschedule it or cancel it. Don't have to make that decision today, but we should for sure make that decision at the council meeting on May 4th.
I just want to say, I apparently didn't get invited to whatever's happening on June 7th because I'm available. So I don't know where everybody's going, but nobody told me about it.
A long ways away, actually.
Is there any chance of doubling up on the 2nd of June? Having both meetings on the 2nd?
Perhaps.
Yeah, all joking aside, I don't, if we don't need to do the meeting, I don't need to do the meeting, but, yeah, that was one of the possibilities you raised in your email.
Yeah, I mean, one of the issues is if we previously advertised public hearings that are kind of
Right.
lined up to hit that date, that could be a problem. I checked with our staff yesterday. We don't have that currently queued up for June 7th. So yeah, we could take a look at that.
Okay. Or we could look at, maybe we could reverse June and July. Have a second meeting in June and 2 meetings in July.
That might be problematic at this
Okay.
point, but the June 2nd, doubling up on June 2nd might be a possibility.
Okay.
I'll check on that.
All right, anything else from other commissioners? All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. Commissioner Staunton moves adjourn, seconded by Commissioner Anderson. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adjourning the HRA meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Carried. HRA meeting for Thursday, April 28th, 2022 is adjourned.